Welcome to the Elevate podcast. This series focuses on elevating and inspiring women and girls into or to remain in the tech sector from the classroom to the boardroom. I'm Kelly Kwarteng, founder and CEO of Helzac and host of the show. Welcome to another episode of Elevate Women in Tech podcast series. Today we are speaking to Bentina Terry, President and CEO of Southern Link and Southern Telecom Inc., where she is responsible for leading Southern Company's telecommunications subsidiaries that provide mission-critical LTE, wireless and dark fiber networks and services to electric utilities and a range of businesses and public sector agencies. Today we'll be discussing Bentina's journey to her current leadership position, the challenges she's overcome, her insights on mentorship and sponsorship, navigating the tech industry as a woman of colour, and the important role that work-life balance plays. And finally, her top tips for any aspiring female leaders listening in today. So Bentina, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's nice to talk to you today too.
Well, let's kick things off at the start. I think, I've given a brief introduction, but the best person to introduce themselves and tell us about themselves can only be yourself. So it'd be great to hear what your journey's been like so far, what led you to being president and CEO over at Southern, and the journey that took you there.
Yeah, so it was quite the unconventional squiggly path, right? So I'm a lawyer with an English degree who came into the utility sector as a lawyer for the utilities. And throughout my career, I've kind of moved laterally. One time I moved back to get some experience I thought was really important. I've moved forward, I've jumped levels, I've just gone all around. And through that path, I've got a set of different experiences. And what I found through my career was that I would oftentimes get an experience. The time that I went back, I went to work where the company meets the customer, right? So I went to work in a part of the business that is directly customer facing and operations related. And I knew that I needed to take that step back and get that experience because it would help me later. And sure enough, I got another job later on, an officer position that they were very comfortable with me moving into because I'd gotten that operations experience. And so what I'd say is my career has been a series of ladders and chutes. If you've ever played that game as a child, chutes and ladders, that kind of move around both laterally and backing up. So it's been awesome.
Perfect. That's some journey that you've had there. And I think it's so nice how you explain the fact that it's not that straight line path. And I think sometimes we get so hung up on going from A to B as quickly as possible, when actually those steps backwards, those lateral moves, those sideways moves to get that experience, then sometimes can actually expedite us up in one or two levels further down the line. So it's great to hear that that's something of your journey, and that's been a bit of your past as well. I'm sure, though, as a woman in a very senior leadership role, that along your way you've faced many challenges. So it would be great if you could maybe share with our audience some of the significant obstacles that you've encountered and how you went about overcoming them.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest obstacles I face, I don't like to use imposter syndrome. I don't know, I think because it's probably overused, but I think everybody finds a point in their career where they doubt themselves. And I remember I was in a non-legal role and I was really kind of doubting. And he'd had all these conversations with me about lawyers in the company. And he was thinking about moving some of the lawyers around. And I was like, wow, he's not even thinking about me. And finally, I walked into his office and I said, you're talking about all these lawyers, but you never talk about me. And he said, I never thought you wanted to be a lawyer again. And so what I'd say is that sometimes we're our biggest obstacle. I did move on to a general counsel role subsequent to that. And he was the one who placed me in that role. It was my first officer position at Southern Company. And so I think sometimes I have been my obstacle in the sense that I haven't believed in myself or understood the value, right? And so the first thing I'd say is that's one thing that you always have to kind of start with yourself. I always tell people, here is where you first start. Then, of course, being a woman of color, working in a field in an industry that is primarily male and primarily white male, Um, Sometimes I'm underestimated, right? Well, people will just assume what I know and what I don't know, or they will assume that I got to where I am because of the package that I come in. And so, with some of those barriers, I joke about it, right? So when I first came to the company, again, I'm a woman. I have a non-technical background, and I come in. I'm working with all these white guys primarily, and I would start off by saying that I was a diversity hire. So I'd step up and I say, okay, y'all, I'm a diversity hire. And I'd say, I have an English degree, right? And they would laugh, and it would kind of break the ice that I know what you're thinking, but I'm going to laugh with you about the joke. It's going to be our little joke. I think there are times when you can do that, um, and not, you should know what's going on, but you don't have to let that be something that you use to limit you, right? I'd say another obstacle that I faced was just not knowing the politics, right? And we like to think we come to work every day. It's not political if you're not in a government position, but it's all political. It's all politics. And there's times that I've been on the wrong side of the politics of situations or people. And I don't mean their politics, I mean company politics. And I think with that, what I found is I had to get help, right? I had to have someone who would educate me and help me understand the politics, help me navigate those politics so that I could figure out how to get out of the situation that I found myself in. So I'd say those are three of the barriers or obstacles I've faced in my career.
I think there's some really great insights and advice that you shared there. And I think that imposter syndrome one, it's a phrase that's used quite a lot. It's a phrase that it's so associated with women, and actually it's something that's associated really with everybody. I think at every point in our careers, in our lives, there's going to be an element of imposter that we feel. And I was talking to somebody about imposter syndrome, and one of the things that they said to me was, if you're feeling like you're an imposter and you're having that feeling of imposter syndrome, it's actually a sign of positivity because it shows that you're growing. And ever since that day, I've took that, and that has been my thing. When I'm feeling that moment where I feel out of my depth or not quite comfortable or not quite sure of myself, it's a moment of growth. So it was that whole, I love to kind of find the negatives and flip it into that positive way. So obviously, as a woman that holds an executive position and you've sat at that executive table, but for women that are listening in, that are aspiring to have that seat at the executive table, or the old phrase that gets bandied around, how do you build an executive presence? How do you have that presence to be able to go into those rooms and hold your own? What advice would you give to those women that are aspiring up to those sorts of levels?
Look above you, right? When people are promoting you, they are asking themselves, oftentimes, would they want you sitting at their table, either as a direct report or a peer? And um, and so, what I often tell people is look at the people that are at that table, look at the way they hold themselves, look at the way the company culture is manifested through them. If you work at a conservative company, uh, then you have to think about presenting a more conservative kind of dress or attire sometimes, and a presence that reads right in that culture. Now, I know people get frustrated by that, right? And they go, "Well, I shouldn't have to be." Well, yeah, you shouldn't, but you do, right? So we have to live in the world that we have, not the world that we want. And if the culture of your company isn't one that meshes with who you are, then you're in the wrong place, right? Oftentimes you cannot swim upstream, right? Or what I try to think more of is when I get at a higher level, can I make some adaptations and when I have a position of power, right? That is
Yeah.
the time when I might be able to say, hey, I know this person doesn't isn't their normal mold of our culture, but here are all the wonderful things, and maybe we should think about whether or not our culture is too restrictive. But then I'm sitting at a table with my peers having that conversation, trying to have that. So I always tell people look at the people who are in those seats you want to sit in and ask yourself, what about who they are, what they portray is something that you emulate, because people really do want to promote people who they can see sitting next to them.
Yeah, I like that. And I think what you said there was a really valuable piece that I take out of that, which was that it might not be the culture that, or adapting yourself to fit into what that stereotype looks like for that organization. But then obviously once you get the seat, it's then having that positional power that you get, sitting with your peers to then make that change. So if your company maybe isn't as inclusive or as diverse as you might want it to be, obviously once you navigate into those senior leadership roles, you do get that opportunity then to make change and put ideas forward. And 9 times out of 10, you're being brought to that table for obviously your thoughts, your opinions, the skill that you have. So that's when that opportunity really can come alive. And I think, as women going into those roles, I think it's really important that we remember that positional power that you bring as you ascend up. An area a lot of women speak to me about. So I do obviously a lot of work from a recruitment perspective, executive headhunting. I coach women and businesses as well. And one of the things they always ask me about is mentors. How do I get myself a mentor? How do I get myself a sponsor at an organisation? And for me, talking about allyship privilege and mentorship and sponsorship, they are like my passion subjects. This is where I really come alive and I really do love it. I know this is something that we spoke about before, and you're quite an advocate for the whole mentoring space as well. So it would be great if you could elaborate with our audience, how mentors or sponsors have played a key role in your journey that you've had, and how you went about finding them, because that's always the question that comes about. How do I find one? And why you believe that they're crucial for anyone that's navigating any career, really.
Make sure everybody remembers to mentors are people who help you through situations and talk to you and give advice and counsel, and sponsors are mentors plus they promote you, right? They are the people that sit at the table and say, this is the person that we should hire, right? So the way I always think about that too is that sponsors typically pick you. You don't pick sponsors, right? They see something in you that makes them want to be your advocate at a table. And so but typically you don't ask somebody to be your sponsor. What you can do though with somebody is, if you want them to be a sponsor, is establish a mentoring relationship or something similar to that. Allow them to get to know you with the hopes that once they really know you, they'll want to sit at the table and advocate on your behalf, right? Because the one thing I also tell people is, around those tables where people talk about you, where your boss sits, your boss should not be the only voice at that table for advocating for you, right? Yeah. Because you may have a point where your boss isn't advocating for you, and you want to have somebody else who might do it for you. So that's one thing to think about when you think about sponsors. Mentors, you can pick. Mentors oftentimes pick you too. I pick people to mentor based on something I see in them and want to spend more time and get to know them better and all that other kind of stuff. And what I will say is that we get stuck in this idea of what a mentor should look like. It should be someone who's senior to you. It should be someone who's in a job that you want. None of that is true. My mentors have run the gambit, and they have been situational mentors. So at that point, when I went into operations, I actually had a mentor who was an employee who was lower level than me, but had much more experience working in that operations part of the business. And he mentored me. And I said, hey, tell me, don't let me do anything stupid. Tell me if I'm doing anything unsafe, all of that stuff. And he would mentor me. He'd give me advice. He'd tell me what to do. He'd say, hey, line crews really love it when they're out working for the boss to show up with some, Cokes and donuts. So he'd say, they're going to be here on Saturday at 8 a.m. They're working on the weekend in particular. Show up. And I'd show up with Cokes and donuts or coffees and donuts, and I was like golden to them. And so what I always tell people is your mentors should run the gambit. They really should. They should be people who are like you. They should be people who aren't like you. They should be people who work in jobs that you want. They should be people that work closely adjacent to you and can advise you. And so I tend to believe that mentorship is something that you should seek from lots of different people. Now, I have some people who are more of the classic traditional mentors, right? They're people that are more senior than me. They're people that mentor me on my career, and that's great. And for those folks, it was kind of I got to know them, they got to know me. What I never do is ask somebody to be my mentor, because I don't think I need to. right? And I think oftentimes when people ask me to be their mentor, the first thing I think about is how little time I have and how much time that's going to take. But I have other people who have made me their mentor, and I've never thought about how much time it takes, right? They just became a part of my life. But if they had asked me, I probably would have said, "Oh God, I'm so busy," right? So I would say I don't ask for mentors because I don't think you need to do that. People can mentor you and they don't even know it. That's okay too.
I think that's quite an interesting concept because it's true when you ask someone to do something, I think they instantly think, have I got the time to do this? But there's ways that obviously you can ask someone to do something via a different approach. And the one that I always give to people that ask me, how can I go about finding a mentor? And I'm like, find that person that inspires you, find that person that, you might want to be like, or they've done what you're about to go and overcome, that challenge that you've got, and ask them to go for a coffee. Start really basic. And then if you naturally gel and you have that relationship, and it's like, should we do another coffee in 2 weeks' time? And then in effect, you have just found yourself a mentor. And I think sometimes we put such focus on it being this big, important relationship when actually the purpose of it is just to help the person overcome a challenge. And the other thing I always say to people is think about your mentor as someone that you're probably not going to be with for the rest of your life. Some people have mentors that stay with them for years. Others have mentors that are with them for a short period of time. And both of those are actually okay. And getting people comfortable with that. Because I think, again, it's that understanding of what a mentor is and it isn't. And the relationship can change so many times. That's from my personal experience along the way. So thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for sharing that analogy of the difference between the mentor and the sponsor. Because I think, again, that's vitally important as well when you start thinking about mentors and sponsors. The next topic I'd like to move on to is obviously throughout your career, you've navigated spaces where women, and particularly women of colour, are often underrepresented. So in those senior leadership executive positions. So it would be great to understand from you how this has impacted your professional journey, what strategies you've developed to overcome any barriers that you may have encountered. I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but would really like to focus in particularly around you being a woman of colour in your space.
Really great example from when I first came to the company. I was sitting in employee orientation, and there was a gentleman in employee orientation next to me. And I am from North Carolina, and which is in the southern United States, of course. And I went to law school, the University of Michigan, which is a highly ranked law school. And so we're talking, and he says, "Well, where'd you go to law school?" I said, "University of Michigan." He said, "How'd you end up at the University of Michigan?" And I immediately took offense. I was like, "Oh, you think I can't get in the university?" I mean, all this stuff was running through my head, and it was seconds. And he said, "Because I don't know why anybody from North Carolina would ever go to Michigan. It's too cold up there." And that was a real learning moment for me. So one of the things I try really hard to do is to give people grace, right? They say that we judge ourselves by our intentions, we judge others by their actions. And so I try to judge folks by what I think their intentions are. And there are people that have bad intentions. That is the reality of life. But if I can start off judging them by their intentions, by what I would hope they meant, then it is so much better. And I don't spend the bulk of my time worrying. Now, let's say that gentleman was racist, said that statement to be racist. The reality is, too, he's some random guy in employee orientation. He doesn't control my career. He's not a part of my career. He's not impactful on my career. And so the other thing I tell folks is don't get caught up in the sidelines, right? Don't let people who are running beside you or behind you impact how you finish. And so that's an important thing. The last thing is I recently went to Sweden for work, and I walk out of the elevator, and it is CEOs and CTOs for small regional telecom companies. And I walk out, and there is a sea of older white guys. Everybody else is an older white guy, except for two Indian guys who worked for Ericsson. We're up there visiting Eric's. I walked out and they looked at me. My first meeting most of them. And I've had this experience before, and they're not sure what to do. It's amazing. I'm like, I got two legs. I put my pants on like you put your pants on. Most of them have wives. It's like, I'm not a foreign being, y'all. Just a lady and a woman of color. But and so I just roll with that too, right? I'm just like, it's not that I feel like I have to make them all feel comfortable, but I do feel like I have to manage through their discomfort, and not let that impact me and who I am. And I'm a friendly person. And by the end of it, I'm also a Southerner and I hug everybody. I was hugging all the guys good night, in a nice little work way. So I just think that what I try not to do is let other people get in my head. And, I play golf and they say you lose golf between your ears, right? And so the same thing happens around these type of issues sometimes. Because sometimes it is true. It is real. What you're experiencing is real, but sometimes it's between our ears and you have to kind of work your way through it. When I encounter people who are clearly racist or sexist, I limit those interactions. If I can find ways not to be around them. I've never had to report anybody. No one's ever done anything to me so drastic where I felt like I needed to go to a department and report it. But I also, people know I'm an employment lawyer too, so by training, so I'm not the person they're likely gonna mess with, if I can say it that way. But when I see other people who have, in particular, I was in a role where I had lots of people that came to me that were experiencing that. I typically would tell them to talk to somebody. Don't let somebody treat you badly. Find somebody, HR, your compliance or concerns department, or ethics or something. But go talk to somebody. Don't let somebody treat you badly.
Some really great advice there in what you shared. And I think, I can't comment on being a woman of colour because I'm not obviously a woman of colour, but I can comment on being a woman. And I think, how you conduct yourself is such an important way, and that being confident with who you are. I think, again, it comes back to like that imposter syndrome piece and that starting with self. I think if you can feel comfortable with yourself, your true authentic self, yes, but always going to meet people that are, unfortunately, along the paths that are sexist or racist, as you mentioned. But I think for the general kind of public that we come across and the general people that you meet in our working lives, I would hope that it's that obstacle of yourself stopping you from being able to really kind of move forward and overcome. So I hope that some of the advice that you shared there will really resonate with women that are listening in, and might be able to use that with them for themselves in their working world. I know from our initial conversation, an area that you really spoke about was you work to live, not live to work, and that work-life balance was really big for you, which I think from speaking to someone in such a senior role, the perception you build up is that it's you live to work. So it was really refreshing to hear that work-life balance was something that was really important to you and something you really uphold really highly. So it would be great to understand, especially in such a high-powered, high-pressured role. So how do you actually go about living that in your day-to-day? And how do you then try and bring that into your team's way of life and how they lead and that culture that you're creating within your own environment?
Yeah, so I lost my brother first. He was 5 years older than me. And I lost my father shortly after that, a couple of years. And with my father, he actually had ALS. And so before he died, we knew, of course, that his death was more imminent than normal, right? Because everybody's on that path anyway. And so both of those events really had me take a step back and ask myself what was really important to me. And I was an officer by this time, a senior officer at Southern Company, not in a CEO role, but a senior officer. And so I remember going to my boss and saying, I was in Pensacola, Florida at the time. My family's in North Carolina. That is 2 plane rides, right? Pensacola is a minor market, so I'd have to fly to Atlanta, then fly home or drive. A drive would take 12 hours. And so I went to my boss and I said, hopefully the company can relocate me to be closer to my folks. If not, I'm going to likely leave because I want to go home once a month to see my father. And I need to be able to get home quickly given his medical condition. And luckily, the company was able to work with me. And when we talked about it, he said, well, we may be able to get you there, but it may not be a promotion. It may be a lateral. I was like, the most important thing for me is to be close to my family. And so and that all worked out. It was a lateral move, and I've been promoted since then. But it really was kind of saying to myself what's important. And I do. I go home once a month. My father has since passed, like I mentioned, but my mom is 82. And it's really important to me that I see her once a month. And my husband, actually, both of his parents have Alzheimer's. And we both are from North Carolina. So we both go home once a month. So what I say is that one day I will leave this Southern company. I won't be here. And if I've defined my life around this place, then it's that I've defined it badly. And when I retire, then who am I, right? And so I have to define it bigger than that. The pandemic was another kind of point in my life where I looked at all the death, quite honestly. If you remember, it was you watch the news every day and see millions of people dying. And I started walking during the pandemic, and I walk all the time now. I take walking calls, I take walking meetings. I have tried to find a way to incorporate it into my life because that's something that kept me sane during the pandemic and keeps me healthy, and it's important that I do it. And so my secretary knows that. She tries to help facilitate that. Sometimes she'll ask people, Bentina loves walking meetings. Would you like to take a walk with her? And she'll get people that go, oh my God, that would be great. And so we'll take a walking meeting. And so I've tried to find a way to incorporate that in my life. My other thing is my husband's extremely important to me, and he is not an executive. And so I block off nights when we're going to have dinner. It says on my calendar, dinner at home. I send him the meeting notice too, and he can decline and accept it. Occasionally he declines it, and I go, what are you doing? But he has something too. He has a life. And then I tell people that Sundays are his day. And unless I absolutely positively have to, I don't do any events or work-related kind of things that would take me from the home on Sunday. Now, it doesn't always work. Sometimes a conference is starting Monday morning, and I got to fly on Sunday. That's just the reality of it. I mean, you can't be so rigid that you can't deal with stuff. But it is to the point where people will ask me, girlfriends who are in an organization that I'm in or something, and they'll say, hey, can you come to the event Sunday? And then they'll go, oh, that's right, Sunday's Antonio's day. And I go, yep, it sure is. And so what I think is we think that people will be mad or they won't understand, or they do. Now, that works the same with my team. I just talked to one of my team members the other day who hasn't taken vacation yet. I was like, you need to take vacation. So we're going to a conference in Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm like, bring your family, take a couple of days. But you need to take a vacation. You need to get away from this place. I tell my employees when they're on vacation, if I reach out to you, it's because it's an emergency. So, but I'm not going to, if they're like reading emails, I'll send them an email back that says, I thought you were on vacation. If they're sending a text message, I'll be like, I thought you were on vacation. Ain't you got some family members you're supposed to be hanging out with or talking to? And so I try really hard to reinforce with them my expectation that they take and use their vacation too. I do send emails on Sunday, and I had to explain every time I get a new team, I have to say Sunday is my prepare for Monday day. So I do send emails on Sunday, but I don't expect you to answer them. It's just but I put down my phone on Friday, and I don't pick it back up. Except, you can text me if it's important. They know, don't email me. If you email me between Friday and Sunday, I am not going to see it because I don't pick it up, right? So I do have to explain to them, yes, you're going to get an email on Sunday. It's okay. You don't have to respond. But so it's just kind of continuing to reinforce for people that they should have more important things in their lives than just what we do.
I love that. And I think that's building a culture of true top-down bottom up kind of enforcement there. And I think, I think sometimes it takes something quite big to happen. I think sometimes when we're in that corporate world to really then change the perspective and realize what's important. And, I'm sorry to hear about your brother and your dad. Similar thing happened to me a year ago with my own husband having quite a strong diagnosis, and that put a lot of perspective into family, and it completely changed how we operate as a family and the things that we do. You're right, because the day that you leave Southern Company, the day that you retire, then you're still Bentina, and it's why can't you be Bentina now?
Right.
So yeah, I love that, and I think it's a good one for us all to take away, that not feeling of guilt because you're not there. We're right at the end of the episode now, and I've really enjoyed speaking to you and learning more about your journey and your experiences, obviously, as a senior leader. I think as we wrap up, and I always ask this to the guests that come on, I'd love to hear what your top 3 tips or pieces of advice you would give to women working within tech. You don't need to be technical to be working in tech, or women in leadership who are looking to advance their careers.
I tell people to ask themselves is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And just ask it. Even if you don't know that you're afraid, ask yourself, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And you will sometimes find out then that you are afraid, right? And so what would you do if you weren't afraid? And then do it, right? So believe me, when they came and they said, Bentina, we want you to be CEO of this subsidiary of Southern Company, I was afraid. But I said, well, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Well, you say yes. Why would you say no, right? And so the first thing I always tell people is ask yourself, what would you do if you weren't afraid? The second thing is we all procrastinate. And so this is just for leaders, for everybody. It's the same kind of question. When you're procrastinating about something, ask yourself why you're doing that.
Yeah.
Right. And oftentimes it's because you don't know how to do it. You don't know where to start. You're not sure you can finish. It's a task that you just really hate. But if you can get down to that next level about why you're putting something off, then lots of times you can work your way through it. And why that's so important as a leader in particular is that so many people depend on us. And I worked with someone one time who procrastinated on every major decision she had to make. And it drove everybody that worked with her crazy. And what I think, though, is that she was unsure, and that's why she didn't make decisions. And if you can get to the root of that, you can sit down with people and you can say, hey, let's talk about either the path or what you need or something. But you can have that conversation as an inner dialogue as well. And so the other thing is, if you're not doing something, ask yourself why you're not doing it. And then the last one, which goes back to kind of what I said in the beginning about when I told my boss, the CEO, why not me, is a very similar story. I had when I was a young lawyer, there was a meeting I was not invited to. And I really thought I ought to be there. And I'm talking to my boss and I'm telling him, they're having this meeting and they didn't invite me and I really should be there. And he said, you really should be there? And I said, yes. And he said, well, go to the meeting. I mean, let them know that you're going to be there, but go to the meeting. So I did that. I reached out and the person was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even really think about it. Yeah. So I go to the meeting and I sit, there's like a table and there are chairs around the table, then there are chairs around the wall. I go sit in one of the chairs around the wall. So my boss comes walking by. I suspect that this was on purpose. He comes walking by and he looks in the room and he sees me and he tells me to come out. And I come out and I'm all proud of myself because I'm in the meeting and I'm like, yeah. He's like, you got in the meeting? And I said, yeah. He said, now sit at the table. Right. And he said, if you have enough to be in this meeting, you have enough to sit at that table. I said, well, he said, let somebody else tell you need to sit back there, but you sit at the table. And so that's what I would say too, is that oftentimes we discount ourselves even when we're present. And so if you deserve to be in the meeting, then you deserve a seat at the table. you deserve to have people hear your voice, right? And so don't make yourself smaller, right? Fill up the space that you're in because you deserve it, right? And so sit at the table.
Love that. Sit at the table. We talk so much about getting our seat at the table, whereas your boss's advice there, take the seat and fill it. I love that. Great 3 pieces of advice, particularly the last one. So thank you very much for sharing, Bentina. I think it's been great having a chat to you, sharing your insights, sharing your journey and experiences with us. And I hope that our guests will leave feeling inspired as I've just been from having this conversation with you, and gaining from such valuable knowledge and conversation that we've had today. So thank you for being part of the Elevate Women in Tech podcast series.
All right. Thank you.